Hello, my name is Liz Elliott. I'm the Industry Relationship Manager at Mercer, Canada. Let me explain to you what that means, because today we're going to talk about how much should I get paid in a post-COVID world. This is particular to engineers. And why would I be coming here to speak with you about this today? Because through my profession, I work to collect compensation data all across Canada and into the US. One of the relationships that we have is with the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, or OSPE, where we collect engineering data all across Canada and report it through the OSPE membership report. So you may be familiar with that data, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we're seeing there for engineering compensation, but we're also going to take a broader look to see what the impact of COVID-19 has been on compensation Canada-wide. So really, what was the impact to compensation in 2020? Well, what we saw is despite the heavy toll the pandemic has taken on the economy, we've seen minimal impact in market values this year. So we saw some immediate responses with emergency pay or reductions in both March and April. Of course, we know that companies are making the majority of their compensation changes through that first quarter of the year in January, March, and April. This coincided right as COVID was kicking off. Most organizations had actually enacted their pay as planned at that point. So we saw a relatively unscathed compensation cycle from that perspective. Ultimately, as the months have gone by, we have seen a relatively stable market price for professional pay. What does that mean? That means that any of the temporary values of how compensation has been impacted would not be necessarily considered the market rate for that profession. They would be the emergency response or a temporary pay adjustment during a crucial period of decision-making and cost containment. So as you can see here, what I'm looking at is the impact of compensation change year over year from 2019 to 2020, pre-COVID versus post-COVID. So salary increase budgets are the value that companies set aside to deliver to their whole employee group. That doesn't mean that every employee is going to receive this value, but it's the percentage of overall compensation pay that they are allocating to an increase year over year. So when we look at this chart, you can see every industry was impacted different when it came to COVID. We have some winners and what we call losers, or those who didn't thrive in a COVID environment. Some of the winners that we saw were tech, biosciences, and mining. And some of the industries that struggled through this period were energy and retail, for reasons that I think you can probably draw conclusions on. As an engineer, this would mean that your own experience in compensation, or the way that your company has responded to you, would be very particular, likely to the industry that you're working in, because more than most other influencers, industry often has the strongest relationship to what you would be paying or earning within your profession across Canada. What I want to point out here is some common actions that organizations were taking in COVID response. And we're looking at cross-industry data. So this is all industries across Canada. And Mercer is polling organizations of all different types in this particular data set beyond engineers. So this would be multiple professions. And what you can see here is the different actions or the prevalence of actions that we are seeing within energy compared to cross-industry. This again is highlighting that if you're an engineer that is working in the energy industry, you may have had a very different outcome than somebody who is working in manufacturing or, for example, mining. The pay landscape in 2020. So flash forward, and we understood what was happening in the crisis period running through spring and summer. But now, as we've come up to planning for 2021, organizations are trying to give us a sense of what they are planning for compensation adjustments. And in this chart, what we're looking at is data that includes zeros versus data that excludes zeros. This is for companies across Canada, so all professions. This does not mean that every engineer is going to receive the number that you're seeing here. But what it means, as I've mentioned, that this is going to be a budget allocation. And typically we would see a higher a stronger relationship with those crucial positions that they want to ensure they are retaining. And so you may receive a higher value or a lower value. Including zeros versus excluding zeros means that not every organization is making salary increases at all. And in fact, during a period of cost containment, it would be common for organizations to freeze salaries. It can be the first action that they take in a response to a crisis situation. So energy is a really good example here where when we include zeros and exclude zeros, there's a difference in pay. And that means that there are going to be organizations there that are doing nothing. There's a salary freeze and compensation will stay the same year over year. I also want to point out the relationship. Now, this is a conceptual chart really kind of leading us into the next set of data. These are not engineering jobs, but what I'm pointing out here is that the value that an individual can receive varies. In this example, I'm looking at hot jobs from the tech industry. This is fast-moving pay. Organizations are looking at some of these jobs and they are saying, I know that I need this individual. I know that I need this labor, and I want to ensure that they are paid and retained appropriately so that I have these crucial employees. In these circumstances here, we've got hourly skilled labor, financial services, human resources. These are positions that have been allocated higher increased budgets because they are crucial to the business. We also see different allocation of salary increases when it comes to level. So each organization would have a different prevalence of engineers that they would be employing at different levels. And so they may be allocating higher increases at the entry level, perhaps if we've got a fast-moving pay market, or it could be at the P3 level or the P4 level where those engineers start to become billable. So now let's drill back down. I am now talking about engineer pay only. So this is Canada-wide organizations who employ engineers who have told us that for their engineering positions, they are making salary increases at these rates for the varying levels. Again, to truly understand what you as an individual would be looking forward to receiving in a year-over-year situation, you would want to drill even further down from this, because this is all industries within a pool, but it's helping us see where the compensation is being allocated from a level perspective. In this example, I'm looking at P1 all the way through P6. This to you would be very similar to A through F, but in the Mercer methodology, which we have introduced for the last 2 years with the Mercer OSPE National Engineering Survey, we're really focusing on isolating the leadership roles. And that's where your M2 and your M3 come into play. M2 is going to be your team leader, so an engineer overseeing other engineers, and your M3 is going to be your manager level. There are executives that do exist, and they're not reported in this survey. So we've got from P1A all the way through to F, which is P6, and then your leadership roles beyond that. Again, if we break it down by industry, taking a look at this slide, this is engineering compensation by industry. If I were to take energy out of the batch, you would actually see that previous slide that I've just shown you come down quite a bit, because energy is an influencer. They're a high-paying influencer. And this is why when you're looking at data or you're trying to understand the decisions that your organization has made, you really will want to be conscious to be paying attention to getting as close to your own individual circumstance, or asking yourself, who does my organization view as their competitor for my talent? And trying to look closely at what those competitors will be paying, because that's how your organization will be perceiving it as well. So in this case, if you are an Ontario professional engineer, your compensation is going to be more heavily influenced by the industries that are prevalent within Ontario, and that is not energy. Energy is really prevalent within Alberta, and we see Alberta compensation spike based on the pressures of the energy industry. Now, what are some of the other impacts that COVID has had on the way that we work? This is kind of big thinking, and it is correlated to your pay. So as organizations look to when is COVID going to end? When are we going to be returning to work in a normal setting? They're looking to reinvent. We've broken this down into two different ideas or pillars of reinvention: reinventing for value and reinventing for flexibility. So we believe, this is groundbreaking, we believe at Mercer that skills will reshape how and what we reward. This resonates with engineers in particular, and I'm going to explain it. So the vision for the future is shifting towards a more flexible definition of work. Performance will be measured differently, and skills will become the universal structure for valuing the work. First, skills will reshape the nature of what we call work. In this model, we lay out the evolution of the career proposition of work. We show the traditional view on the left and future-focused view on the right. And many of your companies are somewhere on this page or somewhere in between. At the bottom, we show the shape of work how the shape of work evolves. So moving from the traditional view of work defined as job, but also defined by the level and perhaps some certifications and skills, perhaps your discipline, your engineering degree, your PMP, for example. So we see skills playing a bigger role in defining work. And next, the future, where work is defined by skills, clusters, and assignments, looking over to the far right here. Levels are there. Levels, this resonates, A through F, P1 through P6, the levels are there. But we have a vision or a belief that we're going to move to a place where these levels are flatter. So in the future, we think the idea of a job as a permanent description of work starts to be replaced by assignments or projects. You know, engineers are probably further ahead on this path than most other professions, actually. So as you move from left to right, the career proposition will evolve from the traditional vertical path, where careers are largely built within a function, to lateral moves and cross-functional career pathing, to ultimately a talent marketplace where people with skills are matched up to the work that needs to be performed anywhere in the organization. And I've already heard future-focused companies within that ambition today. You may think it's crazy to think that jobs will go away, and you're right. For a while, they'll stick around. Systems are built on jobs, but once we get the skills defined and we know the work to be done, work becomes a more dynamic concept. So just think about COVID. What did we all do? We had work that needed to get done. We assembled cross-functional teams, made up different skill sets and levels of people to get it done despite the job we were in. And we were really good at it. So the level of agility was unprecedented and will accelerate this model. We think this is going to happen faster because it's been catapulted forward by COVID-19. Internal gig platforms as a way of matching work to people were already popping up in our pre-COVID world, and now more will continue. So in many respects, we're living this future model already. Okay, so in another view of this model, we look at how performance will be defined and measured in the future. Events like COVID-19 make it challenging to set goals, and we see this model accelerating, as I've mentioned, faster, being catapulted by COVID-19. We see a decreasing emphasis on individual to more of a collective measurement of success. So to illustrate, when we think about how we'll view 2020 due to COVID-19 performance measurement, will be a big question. We'll likely find that we emphasize less on the individual inputs and more on the collective, as we worked on cross-functional teams in an agile way to support the business results. We won't abandon the individual performance measurement, but the collective will emerge as an important gauge on performance. The collective could be a team or an effort that supports the overall business success. If we continue to look at this model, as a result of this new shape of work defined by skills, skills will play a bigger role on base pay. I alluded to that earlier with the annual salary increase discussion. Skills are changing at a pace that is driving the premium for those that have them. So here's a question for you. Is your organization completely familiar with your true set of skills? And do they understand the breadth of the skills that you can offer them? So rather than experiencing in performance setting the base salary of the future, we believe skills will drive base pay to a greater degree. So first, let's look at new hires at the bottom. In the traditional model, pay is largely driven by a few factors: the skills required, performance, or your track record, and to a greater degree, experience. If we think about the future, the role of skills as a mechanism for driving pay will increase as what we get better at identifying, assessing, and creating formal linkages of skills to work and to people. So thinking of the best person for the job, we have the technology now to do this. At the top, ongoing model for current employees, traditionally, we've been trying to balance performance and job accountability to set the pay. We see a similar shift to pay being set based on the skills and individual performance, while accountability as a factor fades. Individual performance becomes less of a driver. As mentioned earlier, performance will continue to be rewarded through other mechanisms, and decreasing role of accountability signifies the evolution away from set jobs and accountability in our current nomenclature. So again, skills play a bigger role on how base pay is set in the future. Can you imagine you're an engineer working in an organization and no longer do you have a job, or are you the guy who should be doing the job because it's your job, but rather they say, this person has the right skills for the job and therefore we're going to be selecting them. Sounds a bit competitive. So COVID-19 has challenged organizations to be more agile in ways that we have never once thought possible. There's been some speculation that this shift is driven by cost and a desire to cut expensive corporate real estate. But actually, in discussions with clients and our survey results, we're finding that this is actually not the case. In fact, only 1 in 3 organizations ranked cost as the top driver. The number one reason is for engagement and productivity. So it goes to show organizations are looking to play the long game here. So will compensation change given remote work? This is a big question, and it's one that we've started to talk about a lot. The reality of what we're seeing is not necessarily the case. We think the answer lies in the fundamentals of compensation strategy and market pricing philosophy. Well, what does that mean? Which is that the compensation should be anchored in the cost of labor for the job location. So what's happening with remote working at scale is that many organizations will shift their labor market from local market to something broader. And that labor market depends on the flexible working policy. Traditional compensation strategy is set to value the work according to the location for the job, with upwards of 83% of companies stating that they will expand their flexible working policies. It's called into question whether pay that was set based on higher costs of labor markets will continue or be reduced if an employee chooses to work in a lower cost market. This is an evolution that continues to unfold, and it's something for us to keep our eye on, not only in our own country, but other countries that will really be setting the model, such as the US, going forward. So what does this all mean for engineers in Canada? Well, I hope by now I've started to give you a reflection. There's traditional pay, there's the way that we've traditionally worked, and it sounds like we were already on a path to evolution here, but it's COVID-19 that has really propelled this forward. So I think if you're an engineer and you're asking yourself, what can I be doing to ensure that I'm receiving the right compensation and being selected for the job going forward? I think having crucial awareness on your own skills, your skill development, and the value of your skills to the marketplace and to your individual employers should certainly be top of mind. It'll be a competitive environment, as it always has been for engineers. And as projects continue, across Canada will be looking forward to your expertise and your experience in developing the Canadian industries. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope that you have enjoyed this session and that it's created some thought-provoking questions for you as you consider your own future. Thank you so much. I'm Liz Elliott.